The tray in Claire's hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer force she used to slam it down on the table in front of the man everyone in the city crossed the street to avoid. Coffee splashed over the rim of the cup and pooled on the table. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't apologize either. "You spilled it," said the man across the booth, his voice calm, almost amused, as if he had all the time in the world. "You'll live," Claire said. 6 men sat around that back booth, and every single one of them stopped talking. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Someone's glass of water hovered in the air, forgotten. The silence stretched so long that the ceiling fan above the booth seemed loud enough to be a siren. The man at the center of the table was Daniel Voss. Nobody at the diner called him by his name out loud. They called him Sir, or they called him nothing at all, choosing instead to look at the floor and hope he wouldn't look back. He wore a dark coat even indoors, and his eyes had the kind of stillness that made grown men lower their voices without knowing why. Claire was new. She had been working at the diner for 11 days, filling in for a waitress who had quit the moment she found out which table she'd been assigned. Nobody had warned Claire properly, or maybe they had, and she simply hadn't been listening, because Rent didn't care who was scary and who wasn't, and neither did Claire. Daniel picked up a napkin and wiped the spilled coffee from his sleeve, slow and unbothered. "Do you know who I am?" "You're a guy who ordered a coffee," Claire said, "and now you're a guy who's going to get a napkin instead of an apology, because I'm not sorry." One of the men beside Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh, then clamped his mouth shut when Daniel's gaze flicked toward him. Daniel turned his attention back to Claire, studying her the way a man studies something he hasn't seen before. Most people who worked in this diner treated his booth like a shrine. They tiptoed. They oversmiled. They refilled his water before he asked. This woman had just told him, in front of 5 of his own men, that he wasn't getting an apology. "You think you're tough," Daniel said, tilting his head slightly. "Standing there with your chin up like that." "I think I have 4 other tables to serve," Claire said, "and none of them are paying me to stand here and be stared at." "Prove it," Daniel said. "Prove you're not scared." Claire set her jaw. "I don't need to prove anything to you. You're not my landlord. You're not my boss. You're a customer, and a rude one, and I've dealt with worse than you before my coffee even got cold this morning." The laugh came out of Daniel before he could stop it, a real one, short and surprised, and it changed the temperature of the whole booth. His men exchanged glances like they'd just watched something that shouldn't have been possible. Nobody made Daniel Voss laugh like that. Not his own brother, not the men who'd known him for 20 years. "What's your name?" he asked. "Claire." "Claire," he repeated, like he was testing the shape of it. "You know, most people who talk to me the way you just did don't get to walk away smiling." "I'm not smiling," Claire said. Her face was flat, unreadable, though her pulse had picked up in a way she refused to acknowledge. "I'm working. Are you going to order something, or are you just here to make my job harder?" Daniel leaned back in the booth, arms spread along the top of the seat, looking every bit like a man who owned the building, even though he only rented the back corner of it once a week. "Bring me a new coffee, and bring the lady a slice of whatever pie she wants, on me." "I don't want your pie," Claire said. It wasn't a question. Claire stared at him for a long moment, weighing whether it was worth the fight. It wasn't. Not over pie. She turned on her heel and walked toward the kitchen, spine straight, refusing to give him the satisfaction of watching her hurry. Behind her, she heard one of the men mutter something low, and Daniel's voice cut through it, still touched with that unfamiliar amusement. "Leave her alone. She's the only person in this city who hasn't lied to my face in a week." In the kitchen, Nora, the diner's owner, grabbed Claire's arm the second the door swung shut. Nora's face had gone the color of old paper. "Are you out of your mind?" Nora hissed. "Do you know whose table that is?" "Some guy who thinks spilling his coffee is a crime," Claire said, grabbing a fresh cup and filling it. "That's Daniel Voss," Nora whispered, glancing at the door as if he could hear through it. "People who cross him disappear, Claire. Actually disappear. I let him sit here because saying no to him is worse than saying yes." "He's still just a man drinking coffee," Claire said. "I've served worse. At least he tips, apparently." "That's not the point," Nora said, wringing her apron in her hands. The point is, you don't talk back to men like that. You smile, you nod, you bring the food, and you disappear into the kitchen the second you're done. You don't call him rude to his face. I'm not going to lie and pretend everything is fine when it isn't, Claire said. She poured the coffee, careful this time, and set a slice of apple pie on a second plate. If he wants me fired for that, he can try. I've survived worse bosses than a diner customer with a bad temper. Nora didn't answer. She just watched Claire walk back out into the dining room with the tray steady in her hands, and she said a quiet prayer that this wouldn't be the last time she saw her. Claire set the coffee and pie down in front of Daniel without ceremony. Anything else? Daniel studied the pie, then her. Sit down. I have other tables. Your other tables can wait 30 seconds. Sit down. Claire glanced around. The diner had emptied out considerably since Daniel's booth had gone quiet. A few regulars quietly paying their checks and slipping out the door, sensing trouble the way animals sense weather. There was no rush left to attend to. She pulled out the chair at the edge of the booth, the one nobody else dared sit in, and sat, arms crossed. 30 seconds, she said. You've got nerve, Daniel said. I don't meet a lot of people with nerve. Mostly I meet people who are good at pretending they have it, right up until it matters. Maybe you just scare the wrong people, Claire said. Or maybe you scare the right people and they're smart enough to be scared. And you're not smart enough? I've got bills, Claire said. Being scared of you doesn't pay them. Being rude to you might get me fired, sure, but at least it's honest. Daniel picked up his fork and cut into the pie slowly, watching her the entire time instead of the plate. Where are you from, Claire? Why do you want to know? Because you're the first person in this diner who's answered a question of mine with another question, instead of a scared little yes, sir. Claire considered lying, considered giving him nothing at all, but something about his stillness told her lies would be seen through instantly, so she gave him a fraction of the truth instead. Not from here. I moved for work. The work didn't pay what I was promised, so now I'm here instead, serving pie to men who spill coffee on purpose to see how I react. Daniel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I didn't spill it on purpose. Sure you didn't. I like you, Daniel said, and the words landed strange in the quiet diner, heavier than they should have been. Most people I meet, I already know everything about them before they open their mouth. I know what they want, what they're scared of, what they'll do to survive. You, I can't read at all. Good, Claire said, standing up before he could say anything else that might make her stay longer than she wanted to. Keep it that way. She walked off toward her other tables, and Daniel watched her go, his fork still resting untouched in the pie. One of his men, a broad-shouldered figure named Leo, who had been at Daniel's side for over a decade, leaned in once she was out of earshot. Boss, you want me to look into her? No, Daniel said, still watching the kitchen door she'd disappeared through. Leave her alone. Whatever she's running from, it's not our business. You laughed, Leo said carefully. I haven't heard you laugh like that since your brother's wedding. I know, Daniel said, and something in his voice made Leo decide not to press further. The rest of Claire's shift passed in a blur of ordinary chaos. Spilled ketchup, a burnt order of eggs, a customer who complained about slow service, despite the diner being nearly empty. She didn't look toward the back booth again, though she was aware, in the corner of her vision, of Daniel and his men lingering far longer than usual, talking in low voices that never quite reached her. When they finally left, close to midnight, Daniel paused at the door and turned back toward the counter, where Claire was wiping down the register. He didn't say anything. He simply looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that carried more weight than words, and then he was gone, the bell above the door ringing once behind him. Nora appeared at Claire's side almost the instant the door shut, breathless. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten you. He laughed. So, Claire said, counting the register drawer. So in 4 years of him coming here, I have never once seen him laugh, Nora said. Not once. You should be careful, Claire. Men like that, when something interests them, it doesn't stay simple. It never stays simple. Claire closed the register drawer with a soft click and looked toward the window, where the street outside was empty, except for the taillights of a car pulling away into the dark. I'm not trying to interest him, she said. I'm trying to survive my shift and go home. But even as she said it, she could still feel the weight of his eyes on her, and some small, stubborn part of her wondered if survival and interest were about to become the same thing. The next morning, before her shift even started, a folded piece of paper was waiting for her at the hostess stand, tucked under the small vase of plastic flowers Nora kept by the register. Claire unfolded it slowly, expecting a complaint, a warning, something official. Instead, there were only 5 words written in sharp, confident handwriting. "You didn't answer my dare." There was no name attached. There didn't need to be one. Claire stood there, holding the paper for a long moment, feeling something unfamiliar settle low in her stomach, something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement, but sat uncomfortably close to both. She folded the note back up, slipped it into her apron pocket, and tied her hair back for her shift, telling herself it meant nothing, telling herself that whatever game Daniel Voss thought he was starting, she had no intention of playing. But even as she walked toward the kitchen to clock in, some small, stubborn corner of her mind was already wondering when he'd come back, and what she'd say to him when he did. Daniel Voss walked into the diner alone on a Thursday night. No Leo, no crew, no black cars idling outside like waiting shadows. Just him, in his dark coat, taking the same back booth like it had his name carved into the wood. Claire noticed immediately. She always noticed when something was different, and an empty booth around him was very different. "No audience tonight?" she asked, setting down a glass of water without being asked. "Did you miss them?" Daniel said. "I missed the tips they usually leave," Claire said. "You're a cheap date alone. I'm not on a date." "Could have fooled me, showing up without your friends, sitting there staring at the door like you're waiting for someone." Daniel's eyes flicked up to hers, sharp and assessing. "Maybe I am." Claire refused to let that land the way it was clearly meant to land. She pulled her notepad from her apron instead. "Coffee, or are we skipping straight to the pie again?" "Coffee," Daniel said, "and sit down when you bring it. I'm not in the mood to talk to the top of your head while you write down my order and walk away. I have other customers." The diner's half empty. "Sit down, Claire." She didn't like that he remembered her name so easily, said it so easily, like it belonged to him now too. But she also didn't like backing down from things, so when she brought the coffee, she set it in front of him and slid into the booth across from him without being asked twice. "You came back," she said, "even after I didn't answer your little dare." "You kept the note," Daniel said. "It wasn't a question." "I threw it away." "You didn't." Claire's jaw tightened. He was right, and she hated that he was right, and she hated more that he seemed to know it without needing proof. "Fine. I kept it. Doesn't mean anything. I keep receipts too. Doesn't mean I love the grocery store." Daniel almost smiled at that, the corner of his mouth twitching in a way that seemed to surprise even him. "You compare me to a grocery store receipt. If the coat fits." He laughed again, quieter this time, but real, the same unfamiliar sound that had turned every head in the diner the week before. "Nobody talks to me the way you do." "Maybe nobody else has the nerve, or maybe they're smarter than me," Claire said. "Either way, you keep coming back for it, so I don't think you mind much." "I don't," Daniel admitted, surprising her with the honesty of it. "It's been a long time since anyone said anything to me that wasn't calculated. Everyone around me chooses their words like they're diffusing something. You just talk." "Maybe you're not as scary as everyone thinks," Claire said. Something shifted behind Daniel's eyes, something colder passing through for just a moment, before it was gone again. "I am, though. Exactly as scary as everyone thinks. You've just never seen the parts of me that would prove it, and I'd rather you didn't." The warning in his voice was quiet but unmistakable, and for the first time since he'd walked in, Claire felt the true weight of who she was sitting across from settle over her like a shadow crossing the sun. She didn't look away, but she filed the warning somewhere careful in her mind. "Why me?" she asked instead of retreating. "You could go anywhere in this city and get respect without lifting a finger. Why keep coming back to a diner where the waitress insults you?" Daniel wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, staring down into it like the answer might be floating there. "Because everywhere else, people give me respect because they're afraid not to. You give me grief because you don't care one way or the other what I do to you. That's rare. That's worth more than respect." Claire studied him for a long moment, and for the first time she let herself really look, not at the reputation, not at the coat, or the stillness, or the way grown men lowered their eyes around him, but at the person underneath it, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You said something once, about not having a lot of nerve around you," Claire said slowly. "What happens to the people who don't have it? The ones who fold?" "They get used," Daniel said simply. "People without nerve are easy to move around. I don't trust easy things." "And what happens to the ones who have it, the ones like me?" Daniel met her eyes directly. "I haven't decided yet." The honesty of the answer sat heavy between them, and Claire found herself unable to look away first, something in his gaze pulling at a thread she hadn't realized was loose inside her. She broke the moment by standing, needing distance, needing the ordinary noise of the diner to drown out whatever had just passed between them. "I have other tables," she said again, though this time it felt more like an excuse than a fact. Daniel let her go without protest, watching her walk away with an expression Leo would have recognized instantly, though Leo wasn't there to see it. Later that night, close to closing, a man Claire didn't recognize slid into the counter seat nearest the register. He was younger than Daniel's usual crowd, dressed sharp but cheap, the kind of sharp that was trying too hard. He ordered black coffee and watched Claire work with an attention that made her skin prickle. "You're the one Voss likes," the man said finally, once the diner had emptied enough that no one else could hear. Claire kept wiping down the counter, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a startled reaction. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Word travels fast in this city. Voss doesn't sit alone for just anyone." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Must be nice, having a man like that interested in you. Dangerous, too. Is there a point to this conversation, or are you just here to make small talk about my customers?" "Just curious what a girl like you sees in a man like him," the man said, standing and dropping a few crumpled bills on the counter. "More than enough for the coffee. Careful who you get close to, sweetheart. People who get close to Voss have a habit of becoming targets for people who don't like him very much." He left before Claire could respond, the bell over the door ringing behind him, just like it had for Daniel the week before. Except this time, the sound sent a cold, unfamiliar chill down her spine instead of curiosity. Claire told herself it meant nothing, some low-level nobody trying to rattle her for fun. But she found herself glancing toward the door more often for the rest of her shift, and when she finally locked up and walked home, along the quiet street, she kept her keys threaded between her fingers the entire way, a habit from a life she'd hoped she'd left behind. She didn't tell Nora about the man. She didn't tell anyone, but that night, lying awake in her small apartment above a shuttered bakery, she found herself thinking not about the stranger's warning, but about the way Daniel had said he hadn't decided yet, and the way that answer had felt less like a threat and more like an invitation she wasn't sure she wanted to accept. The following Thursday, Daniel returned again, alone once more, and this time he didn't wait for her to bring the coffee before speaking. "Someone talked to you," he said the moment she reached the booth. It wasn't a question. Man, younger than my usual crew, sat right there at the counter. Claire's stomach dropped slightly. "How do you know that?" "Because I know everyone who walks into places I frequent," Daniel said, and there was an edge to his voice now, something sharper than the amusement he'd shown before. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing important," Claire said carefully. "Claire, he said people who get close to you become targets," Claire admitted finally, watching his face carefully for a reaction. "He said it like a warning, not a threat. Exactly. More like a friendly piece of advice from a stranger who didn't seem all that friendly." Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the stillness in him turned into something coiled and dangerous. A stillness that belonged to a predator deciding whether to move. What did he look like? Claire described him as best she could, and she watched something click into place behind Daniel's eyes, recognition and irritation blending into an expression that made the whole diner feel colder. "Stay away from the counter seats on slow nights," Daniel said finally. "And if anyone else approaches you like that, you tell me immediately. Not Nora, not anyone else. Me. I'm not one of your men, Daniel. You don't get to give me orders." "I'm not giving you an order," Daniel said, and his voice had dropped low, quiet enough that only she could hear it. "I'm telling you that there are people in this city who would use you to get to me, and I would very much prefer that didn't happen. Call it whatever you want, but don't ignore it." Claire felt the shift in the air between them. Something that had started as banter, now edging towards something far more serious. And for the first time she understood, really understood, that the world Daniel Voss lived in wasn't separate from hers anymore. Not since the moment she'd slammed a tray down on his table and refused to apologize. She didn't answer him right away. She simply nodded once, short and tight, and walked back toward the kitchen, aware of his eyes following her the entire way, aware that whatever line existed between customer and waitress had already been crossed weeks ago, and there was no walking it back now. The back door of the diner slammed shut behind Claire as she stepped out into the alley after her shift, the night air cold enough to make her pull her jacket tighter, and it took only 3 steps before she realized she wasn't alone. 2 men stood near the dumpsters, one leaning against the brick wall with practiced casualness, the other blocking the mouth of the alley that led toward the street. Claire's stomach dropped, every instinct in her body flaring at once. "Claire, right?" The one leaning against the wall said. He was the same younger man from the counter, the sharp-dressed stranger who had warned her weeks before, except now there was nothing friendly left in his tone at all. "Get out of my way," Claire said, keeping her voice steady, even as her heart pounded. "We just want to talk," the man said, pushing off the wall and stepping closer. "You've gotten pretty close to Voss, haven't you? Cozy little chats every Thursday. Bet he tells you things. Bet he trusts you. I serve him coffee. That's the extent of our relationship." "Sure," the second man said, finally speaking, his voice flat and cold. "And we're just having a friendly chat in an alley at midnight." Claire's mind raced, calculating distance, calculating options, the way she'd trained herself to do years ago, in a life she thought she'd left behind for good. The alley was narrow, the exit blocked, and there was no one around to hear if she called out. "Whatever you think I know, I don't," Claire said, backing up a step despite herself. "I'm a waitress. I don't know his business. I don't know his plans. I don't know anything worth threatening me over." "Maybe not yet," the first man said, closing the distance between them faster than Claire expected. "But you will, and when you do, you're going to remember this conversation, and you're going to tell us what he says, or things get a lot less friendly for you." He reached for her arm, and something in Claire snapped into place, old instinct overriding fear. She twisted away from his grip, driving her elbow back hard into his ribs, and the man grunted in surprise, stumbling back a step. She didn't wait to see if he recovered. She lunged toward the narrow gap between the dumpster and the wall, but the second man was faster, grabbing her wrist and yanking her back with enough force to make her cry out. "Feisty," the first man said, straightening up and rubbing his side, an ugly smile spreading across his face. "I like feisty. Makes this more fun." Claire twisted against the grip on her wrist, adrenaline burning through her fear, and managed to land a solid kick against the second man's knee that made him buckle, loosening his hold for her to break free. She stumbled backward, putting distance between herself and both men, breathing hard. "Voss isn't going to protect a waitress forever," the first man said, no longer bothering to hide the threat in his voice. "Sooner or later, you're going to be useful to us, one way or another." Headlights swept into the alley suddenly, blinding and sudden, and both men froze as a car screeched to a stop at the mouth of the alley. The driver's door opened before the engine had even fully stopped, and Daniel stepped out, his expression carved from something far colder and more dangerous than Claire had ever seen on him before. "Get away from her," Daniel said, his voice low and lethal in a way that made both men take an immediate step back. "Boss, we were just—" the first man started. "I don't care what you were just," Daniel said, closing the distance with slow, deliberate steps. "You touched something that belongs to me. That's the last mistake either of you makes tonight." Claire's breath caught at the word belongs, but there was no time to unpack it, because Leo appeared behind Daniel from the same car, moving fast, and within seconds, the 2 men found themselves pinned against the alley wall, all their earlier bravado draining out of them. "Who sent you?" Daniel said, and it wasn't a question, it was a demand that left no room for silence. The first man's eyes darted toward Claire, then back to Daniel, calculation and fear warring across his face. "Victor," he finally said, the name dropping into the alley like a stone into still water. Victor sent us. He wants to know what you're planning before you make your move on the East Docks. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in the air around him did. A tightening, a coldness that made even Claire take an involuntary step back. You tell Victor, Daniel said quietly, that if he ever sends anyone near her again, I won't bother sending a message back. I'll come myself. The two men didn't need to be told twice. Leo released them, and they scrambled out of the alley without looking back, disappearing into the dark street beyond. Daniel turned to Claire immediately, his cold fury melting into something closer to concern, though he tried to keep it hidden beneath his usual composure. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Claire said, though her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, the reality of what had just happened crashing over her all at once. You're not fine, Daniel said, stepping closer, studying the red marks already forming on her wrist where the man had grabbed her. You're shaking. I said I'm fine, Claire snapped, though there was no real heat behind it, just the exhausted edge of someone trying to hold themselves together. This is exactly what that man in your booth warned me about, isn't it? Getting close to you makes me a target. I told you to be careful, Daniel said. I told you to stay away from strangers approaching you. You didn't tell me your rivals would corner me in an alley, Claire said, her voice rising now, fear turning into anger, because anger was easier to hold on to. You didn't tell me that talking to you for a few weeks would turn me into leverage in whatever war you're fighting. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked less like the untouchable figure who commanded fear across the city, and more like a man confronting a mistake he hadn't anticipated making. You're right, he said finally. I should have told you sooner. I should have had someone watching this place the moment that man first approached you. I don't need a bodyguard, Claire said. I need my life back. The one where I serve coffee and go home, and nobody grabs me in an alley because of who I'm talking to. I can protect you, Daniel said. Let me protect you. No, Claire said immediately, the word sharp and final. I don't need saving, especially not by you. I got myself out of worse situations than this, before you ever walked into that diner. Daniel studied her for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his eyes, respect and frustration tangled together. Fine, he said finally, but I'm not going to pretend I didn't just watch two of Victor's men put their hands on you. That's not something I can unsee, Claire, and it's not something I'm willing to let happen again, whether you ask for my help or not. That's not your decision to make. It is tonight, Daniel said, his voice quiet but immovable. Let me at least drive you home. After that, believe whatever you want about needing me or not needing me. Tonight, you're getting in the car. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could walk home on her own just fine, but her legs were still trembling faintly from the adrenaline, and some small, tired part of her didn't have the energy left to fight him on this one thing. She nodded once, stiffly, and let him lead her toward the car. The drive was silent for the first few minutes, the city lights sliding past the windows in streaks of gold and red. Claire stared out at them, replaying the alley over and over, the grip on her wrist, the cold certainty in Daniel's voice when he'd said the words, "That belongs to me." You called me yours back there, she said finally, breaking the silence. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I did. I'm not yours, Daniel. I know, he said. It wasn't strategic. It was the truth of what I felt in that moment, watching them touch you. I'm not going to apologize for it, even if it wasn't my place to say. Claire didn't respond to that, unsure of what to say, unsure of how much of the fear coursing through her was about the alley, and how much of it was about the way his voice had sounded saying those words. She turned back toward the window and watched the city pass by in silence for the rest of the ride, aware that whatever line had existed between them before tonight had been erased completely, and there was no redrawing it now. A black car sat parked across the street from Claire's apartment every night for the following week. Unmoving, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know to look for it, but Claire noticed it the very first night and felt something twist uncomfortably in her chest. She marched across the street on the third night, arms crossed, and rapped her knuckles hard against the driver's side window. Leo rolled it down, looking faintly sheepish. You're supposed to be discreet, Claire said. I am discreet, Leo said. You're just observant. Where's Daniel? Not here, Leo said. He said to watch the building. Make sure nobody else from Victor's crew comes sniffing around. That's all this is. I didn't ask for this, Claire said. I know, Leo said, not unkindly. For what it's worth, I told him you'd probably tell him exactly that. He said to let you be angry about it, as long as you were also safe. Claire stood there in the cold for a moment longer, torn between the urge to march straight to wherever Daniel was, and demand he call it off, and the quieter, more honest part of her that felt oddly steadied by the knowledge that someone was watching the street, after everything that had happened in that alley. She hated that second feeling more than she hated the car itself. She found Daniel 2 nights later, back in his usual booth, alone again, like he'd started making a habit of coming without his crew now that the diner had become something more complicated than a place to sit and drink coffee. Call off your guard dog, Claire said, sliding into the booth across from him, without waiting for an invitation this time. Leo's not a guard dog. He's parked outside my apartment every night. For your safety. I didn't ask for that, Claire said, echoing what she'd told Leo, though her voice had less certainty in it now than it had a few nights ago. I told you I don't need saving. You also got attacked in an alley 3 days ago, Daniel said evenly. Forgive me for not simply trusting that lightning won't strike the same place twice. That's not your call to make, Claire said, though the fight in her voice had softened at the edges, worn down by exhaustion, and by the memory of those hands on her wrist that still made her flinch sometimes when she closed her eyes. You don't get to decide what happens to my life just because you feel guilty about what your rival did. It's not guilt, Daniel said quietly, or it's not only guilt. Then what is it? Daniel was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost the careful control he usually wrapped around every word. I've spent most of my life making sure nothing gets close enough to matter, because the things that matter are the things people use against you. I've watched it happen to people I care about more times than I want to remember, and then you slammed a tray on my table and told me I wasn't getting an apology, and for the first time in years, I wanted something to matter again. Claire's chest tightened at the rawness in his voice, the honesty she hadn't expected and wasn't entirely prepared for. That's not an answer, she said, though her own voice had gone quieter too. It's the truest one I have, Daniel said. The diner isn't about the coffee anymore, Claire. I think you already know that. I think you've known it since the second week, when I came back alone. Claire looked away first this time, staring out the window at the empty street, trying to find her footing again after the ground had shifted so suddenly beneath her. I don't do this, she said finally. Whatever this is, I've spent the last few years building a life where I don't need anyone, where nothing can be used against me, because the last time I let someone matter, it cost me everything. What happened? Daniel asked, and there was no demand in the question, only quiet space for her to fill if she chose. Claire hesitated, the old wound still tender even after all this time. I had a life before this city, she said slowly, a different name for it at least. Someone I trusted, who used what I told him to hurt the people I loved. I lost almost everything getting away from that. I promised myself I'd never let anyone get close enough to do that again. Understanding passed over Daniel's face, something that looked almost like recognition, like he'd heard a version of this story before, maybe even lived a version of it himself. I'm not him, he said quietly. You're a man who runs half the crime in this city, Claire said. Forgive me if that doesn't exactly reassure me. I've never lied to you, Daniel said. Not once, not about who I am or what I do. Everyone else in my life, they tell me what I want to hear. You've never done that. That's worth more to me than you understand. Claire studied him for a long moment, weighing the truth of what he'd said against every instinct that told her to run, to protect the careful, guarded life she'd built brick by brick since leaving her old one behind. But something about the way he looked at her, steady and unflinching, made the instinct to run feel smaller than it had in a long time. I'm not asking you to stop the car outside my apartment, she said finally, the closest thing to surrender she was willing to offer. I'm not saying I need it, but I'm not telling you to take it away either. Something eased in Daniel's shoulders, a tension she hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. That's more than I expected. Don't get used to it, Claire said, though there was no real bite in the words anymore. I still think you're insufferable. I can live with insufferable, Daniel said, and the smile that crossed his face this time was different from every other expression she'd seen on him. Softer, less guarded, meant only for her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while after that, the diner quiet around them, the ordinary hum of the refrigerator and the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen filling the space where words weren't needed. Claire found herself, for the first time since that first night with the spilled coffee, not thinking about escape routes or exit strategies, but simply sitting there, present, unafraid in a way she hadn't let herself be in years. It didn't last. The bell above the door rang sharply, and both of them looked up as Leo burst in, his usual composure cracked wide open with urgency. "Boss, we've got a problem. Victor's making a move tonight. He knows about her." His eyes flicked toward Claire. "He knows you care about her, and he's planning to use that." Daniel was on his feet instantly, all the softness from moments before hardening back into the cold, dangerous stillness Claire had first seen weeks ago in that back booth. "Where?" "Everywhere," Leo said grimly. "Her apartment, this diner, anywhere she might be. He's not being subtle about it. He wants you to know he's coming for her, so you make a mistake trying to protect her." Claire's stomach dropped, the fragile peace of the last few minutes shattering completely. "How does he even know?" she asked, though some cold part of her already suspected the answer. "The men from the alley," Daniel said grimly. "They must have reported back more than just a warning. They must have told him what they saw between us." Claire stood, her hands trembling slightly, though this time the fear wasn't for herself alone, it was for what came next, for the danger she'd somehow become the center of, without ever asking for it. "What do we do?" Daniel turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear, not for himself, but for her. "We don't do anything," he said. "You're going somewhere safe, tonight, and I'm going to end this before Victor gets anywhere near you." "I'm not hiding while you go fight your rival alone," Claire said. "This isn't a discussion," Daniel said, his voice sharp with an urgency that left no room for argument. "Leo, get her somewhere secure. I'll handle Victor myself." Claire opened her mouth to argue, to insist she wasn't the kind of woman who hid while other people fought her battles for her, but the look on Daniel's face stopped her, something raw and desperate beneath the command, and for the first time she understood exactly how much danger they were both actually in. The safe house Leo brought her to was a quiet apartment above a closed bookstore, plain and unremarkable from the outside, the kind of place nobody would think twice about. Claire paced the small living room for what felt like hours, her mind spinning through every possible outcome, none of them good. "You should sit down," Leo said from his post near the window, watching the street below with the patient focus of a man who had done this many times before. "Pacing won't change what happens out there." "Neither will sitting still," Claire snapped, though she stopped anyway, dropping onto the edge of a worn couch and pressing her palms against her eyes. "This is insane. A week ago, my biggest problem was a customer who spilled his own coffee and blamed me for it. Now I'm hiding in a safe house because some crime boss decided I mattered enough to be used as a weapon against the man I—" She stopped herself before the word could finish forming, but Leo's eyebrows had already risen slightly, and he didn't press her on it, which somehow made the unfinished sentence feel even louder in the quiet room. "Daniel doesn't lose," Leo said instead, gently. "Not against Victor. Not against anyone who's tried before. He's careful. He's smart. Whatever's happening out there right now, he's not walking into it blind." "That's not exactly comforting," Claire said. "You're telling me he's good at violence. I don't want him to be good at violence tonight. I want him to be safe." "In this life," Leo said quietly, "being good at violence is what keeps you safe." The words settled uneasily in Claire's chest, and she found herself staring at the door, willing it to open, willing some sign that everything happening beyond these walls was going to end the way she needed it to end. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Around 2 in the morning, Leo's phone buzzed, and he answered immediately, his expression unreadable as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Claire watched him, her heart hammering, trying to read anything from the tight set of his jaw. He wants us at the East Docks, Leo said finally, ending the call. It's over there. Victor's crew tried to hit one of Daniel's warehouses to draw him out, but Daniel got there first. Is he hurt? Claire asked immediately, already on her feet. I don't know, Leo admitted. He said to bring you. He wouldn't say that if things weren't mostly settled, but I'm not going to promise you everything's fine until I see it myself. The drive to the docks felt endless, the city blurring past in streaks of orange streetlight. Claire's hands clenched tight in her lap the entire way. When they finally arrived, the scene that greeted them was chaos settling into stillness. Several of Daniel's men standing guard around the perimeter of a warehouse whose windows had been shattered. A few cars overturned near the entrance, the aftermath of something violent and fast. And there, near the center of it all, stood Daniel, a shallow cut above his eyebrow, the only visible sign that he'd been in a fight at all, his coat torn at the shoulder, but otherwise intact, standing over a man kneeling on the ground with his hands bound. Claire was out of the car before Leo had even fully stopped it, running across the cracked pavement toward him, and Daniel turned just in time to catch her as she reached him, both of them nearly stumbling with the force of it. You're hurt, she said, her fingers finding the cut above his eyebrow with a gentleness that surprised them both. It's nothing, Daniel said, though he didn't pull away from her touch. Victor's handled. He won't be sending anyone after you again. Claire glanced past him toward the man kneeling on the ground, recognizing him from photographs Leo had shown her earlier that night. Victor himself, defeated and furious in equal measure, his men either scattered or subdued around the warehouse. You did this yourself, she said, understanding dawning. You didn't send your men in first. I wasn't going to risk anyone else for this, Daniel said. Not when it was my fault. You got dragged into it in the first place. It wasn't your fault, Claire said. I chose to keep talking to you every Thursday. I chose to sit down when you asked. I could have kept my distance from the very beginning, and I didn't, because some stubborn part of me wanted to know what happened if I didn't. Daniel's expression softened, the last of the battle-hardened edge in his eyes melting into something far more vulnerable. Prove it, he said quietly, echoing the words from that very first night, except this time there was nothing mocking in them at all. You never did answer my dare, all those weeks ago. Prove you're not scared. Claire looked at him for a long moment, at the blood drying above his eyebrow, at the torn coat, at the man who had just dismantled a rival's entire operation single-handedly, rather than risk anyone he cared about, and she realized, with a clarity that surprised her, that she wasn't scared at all, not of him, not of what came next. I'm not scared, she said, and closed the distance between them completely, answering his dare in the only way that felt true, steady, and unflinching, the way she'd met every challenge he'd thrown at her since that very first night with the spilled coffee. Around them, his men exchanged glances and quietly looked away, giving them the moment, and even Leo, standing near the car, allowed himself the smallest of smiles, the first genuine one Claire had seen from him since this had all begun. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel rested his forehead lightly against hers, something in his usually guarded posture finally, fully at ease. Victor's finished, he said quietly. Nobody else is going to come after you. I made sure of that tonight. And what happens now? Claire asked. I go back to serving you coffee every Thursday, and we pretend the last few weeks didn't happen? No, Daniel said, and the certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Now you come to the diner, because you want to, not because it's your job. And I sit in that booth because I want to see you, not because I need a reason to be there. Now we stop pretending this is anything other than what it is. Claire allowed herself a small, real smile, the guarded walls she'd built over years finally cracking open, not from weakness, but from the recognition that some things were worth the risk. That sounds like a lot of Thursdays. I'm counting on it, Daniel said. Behind them, the sun was beginning to rise over the docks, casting long gold light across the wreckage of the night's battle, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed faintly, someone's call finally reaching the authorities, long after the danger had passed. Daniel took Claire's hand, steady and sure, and led her back toward the car, leaving the ruins of Victor's ambition behind them. The diner reopened for its regular Thursday crowd a week later, The back booth freshly cleaned, the same worn seats and the same chipped table. Except now the waitress who brought the coffee didn't rush away after setting it down. She sat, unafraid, across from the man everyone else in the city still crossed the street to avoid, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was pretending to be anything other than exactly what they were. Two people who had found, against every possible odd, something worth being brave for.